Somewhere in the middle of El Salvador, there is a building most people will never see from the inside. It has no windows facing the outside world, no signs on the road pointing to it. Visitors are not welcome. Journalists are not allowed in. And the people inside, tens of thousands of them, have not spoken to their families in over 2 years. Some of them may never speak to anyone again. This place was not built slowly, carefully, over years of planning. It was built in less than 7 months, rushed. Desperate. Like someone needed it urgently. And when it was finished, the president of the country stood in front of the cameras and smiled. He called it the answer to his country's prayers. Human rights organizations called it something very different. And somewhere in between those two descriptions lies the truth. A truth that is stranger, darker, and more complicated than anything you've seen in a movie. Today, we go inside. If you've never subscribed to this channel before, do it right now. Because the story you're about to hear is the kind they don't want going viral. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what we find. To understand what this place is, you first have to understand what El Salvador was. For decades, El Salvador was one of the most dangerous countries on the planet. Not because of war, not because of famine, but because of gangs. Two gangs, to be specific. Mis 3 and Barrio 18. These were not small street gangs fighting over corners. These were organizations with hundreds of thousands of members across Central America. They had rules, ranks, territories, uniforms tattooed directly onto the skin of their members. Some had tattoos on their faces, their necks, their hands, their eyelids. If you lived in their neighborhood, you paid them. Every month. Like a tax. Shop owners paid. Bus drivers paid. Even small market vendors who sold fruit on the street paid. If you refused to pay, you disappeared. If your son was the right age and they wanted him to join, he joined. Or the family suffered. Girls were taken as girlfriends by gang leaders, whether they wanted to be or not. Children as young as 9 years old were used as lookouts, carrying messages, watching for police. In some neighborhoods in El Salvador, the gang wasn't just powerful. The gang was the government. The police didn't enter. The army didn't enter. There were entire communities where the only law that existed was the law of the gang. At its worst, El Salvador had a murder rate of 103 killings per 100,000 people per year. To put that in perspective, the United States, which many people consider violent, has a murder rate of about 6 per 100,000. El Salvador's was 17 times higher. People were being killed every single day. Not in a war. Not by soldiers. By neighbors. By teenagers with machetes and guns. By organizations that had turned entire cities into open-air prisons where ordinary people were the prisoners. This went on for years, decades. Generation after generation grew up knowing nothing else. And then, a young man with a very unusual background decided he was going to fix it. His name is Nayib Bukele. He is not what you would expect a president to look like. He's in his early 40s. He wears baseball caps and leather jackets. He posts on Twitter, or X, as it's now called, like a teenager. He calls himself the world's coolest dictator as a joke. Or maybe not a joke. It's hard to tell. His father is Palestinian. His mother is Salvadoran. He grew up in a wealthy family. He ran a marketing company before he entered politics. He knows how cameras work. He knows how stories are told. And he is very, very good at making people believe in him. In 2019, Bukele was elected president of El Salvador with nearly 54% of the vote. Young people loved him. They were tired of the old politicians who had promised to fix the gang problem for 30 years and never did. Bukele said he would actually fix it. For a while, things were complicated. There were rumors, never fully proven but investigated by multiple journalists, that his government had quietly negotiated with the gangs, that there were secret meetings, that the gangs agreed to reduce killings in exchange for better prison conditions and political protection. Murder rates did drop during this period. People noticed. But the deal, if there was a deal, didn't last. March 26, 2022. That date matters. Remember it. On that single Saturday, gangs across El Salvador went on a rampage. Coordinated. Organized. Like it was planned. 62 people were killed in one day. 62. Bodies were found in cars, on sidewalks, inside homes. A bus driver was shot dead in his seat. A young man was found dead outside a bakery. The killings happened in different cities, different neighborhoods all at once, as if someone had given a signal. It was the single deadliest day in El Salvador in more than 20 years. The country went silent with shock. And Bukele went on camera. He was not calm. He was not giving a prepared political speech. He looked like a man who had made a decision, a final, irreversible decision, and he was done waiting. Within 24 hours, he declared a national state of exception. Now, most countries have emergency powers. They exist for natural disasters, invasions, pandemics, extreme situations where normal rules can't keep up with the crisis. What El Salvador's state of exception did was this: the right to be told why you were arrested, gone. The right to a lawyer before being questioned, gone. The right to be brought before a judge within 24 hours, gone. The time police could hold you without charging you, extended from 72 hours to 15 days. Then later, extended again. In other words, if the police thought you were connected to a gang, they could take you, hold you. And you had almost no legal protection while they did. The arrests began immediately. Hundreds in the first day, thousands in the first week, tens of thousands in the first month. Police and soldiers swept through neighborhoods. They used tattoos as evidence. They used anonymous tips. They used lists of names. They arrested people in their homes, at work, walking down the street. Old men, teenagers. Women, people with no criminal record whatsoever. The prisons filled up so fast that the government had to put people in gyms, in sports stadiums, in any building with walls and a roof. And still the arrests kept coming. El Salvador's existing prisons could hold about 19,000 people total. But by the end of 2022, they had arrested over 60,000. They needed somewhere to put them. They needed something that had never been built before. In a quiet, flat valley in the Tecoluca region of El Salvador, farmland, mostly quiet roads, very few neighbors, the government bought 165 hectares of land. Construction crews arrived. Heavy machinery. Concrete. Steel. Lights. Cameras. Miles of razor wire. Workers were on site 7 days a week. Night shifts. Day shifts. No breaks in construction. In under 7 months, what had been empty farmland became the largest prison in the entire Western Hemisphere. They called it CECOT, Centro de Confinamiento del Terrorismo, the Terrorism Confinement Center. Not a prison. Not a correctional facility, not a rehabilitation center, a confinement center. The name itself was a message. Before we go inside those walls, drop a comment right now. I want to know, do you think what Buccal did was right or wrong? Just type right or wrong in the comments. Let's see where this audience stands. I'll be reading every single one. On February 24, 2023, the first transfer happened. And Buccal made sure the whole world watched. Drone cameras flew overhead. Official government video crews were there. The footage was broadcast on national television, shared on social media, sent to international news outlets. What people saw was this: 2,000 men, shaved heads, white shorts, bare chests, bare feet, hands zip-tied behind their backs, moving in a long human chain. Heads down. Single file. Controlled by guards in tactical gear carrying rifles. They moved in perfect synchronized rows. The guards made sure of that. Forced to move in an unusual way, shuffling in unison, all leaning slightly forward, creating an image that looked almost choreographed. Because it was. Bucal's team knew exactly what kind of image they were creating. It was meant to send a message to gangs still on the streets of El Salvador. Look what happens now. The world watched. Some people cheered. Others went quiet. And those 2,000 men walked through the gates of CECOT and disappeared. No phone calls after. No visits from family. No news from inside. Just silence. What exactly happens behind those walls? What does a person's life look like inside a place specifically designed to hold 40,000 human beings? And, perhaps most importantly, are all 40,000 people actually guilty of the things they're accused of? That last question is the one that changes everything. But that answer doesn't come yet. First, you need to see what's inside those walls. In January 2025, returned to the White House, one of the first things on his agenda was immigration. Specifically, what to do with the hundreds of thousands of people living in the United States who entered the country illegally, or who the government believed were connected to criminal organizations. Trump had a problem. Deporting people is not as simple as it sounds. You can't just put someone on a plane and drop them in a foreign country. That country has to agree to take them. And many countries, for various political and logistical reasons, push back. They delay. They negotiate. They sometimes refuse entirely. But there was one country whose president didn't just agree. He offered. Nayib Buccal picked up the phone, or his representatives did, and made a proposal that almost no world leader had ever made before. The offer was simple: send us your unwanted. We have room. El Salvador would accept prisoners that the United States wanted to remove. Not Salvadoran citizens being deported home. That was already happening. This was different. This was El Salvador offering to warehouse people from other countries. People the U.S. considered dangerous. People the U.S. wanted removed but couldn't easily send elsewhere. In exchange, the United States would pay. The first payment, confirmed by official U.S. government records, was $6 million. For that $6 million, El Salvador agreed to take a group of men the United States had labeled as members of Terrorism, a violent Venezuelan gang that had expanded into the U.S. and other parts of Latin America. On a Sunday night in March 2025, planes took off from United States soil carrying over 200 Venezuelan men. They were not told where they were going. They landed in El Salvador. And they were walked hands restrained, heads down, through the gates of CECOT. Now here is where the story becomes something that legal scholars, human rights lawyers, and ordinary people across America could not stop talking about. The law the Trump administration used to carry out these deportations was called the Alien Enemies Act. It was written in 1798. 1798. That is not a typo. The law used to send over 200 people to a foreign megaprison in 2025 was written the same decade that George Washington was president. It was originally designed to deal with citizens of enemy nations during wartime specifically, written with the threat of a French invasion in mind. It had only been used 3 times in American history before 2025. During the War of 1812, during World War I, during World War II, when it was used, among other things, to justify the internment of Japanese Americans. A decision that the United States government later formally acknowledged as one of the greatest civil rights violations in the nation's history. Now, in 2025, it was being used again against Venezuelans, whom the government labeled as gang members, without trials, without presenting evidence in open court, without giving the men or their lawyers a proper chance to challenge the accusations before they were put on planes and flown to a country most of them had never set foot in before. The legal system reacted immediately. Federal judges issued emergency orders. Some ordered the planes to turn around mid-flight, something almost unheard of in American legal history. Judges demanded that the government prove in court that these men were actually gang members before removing them. The government's response was extraordinary. Officials argued that the president's power in matters of national security and immigration was essentially unlimited, that judges did not have the authority to stop these removals, that the courts needed to stay out of it. Some judges disagreed loudly and on the record. One federal judge said the administration's position, if accepted, would mean that the president could deport anyone to anywhere for any reason, with no court able to stop it. He called this incompatible with the United States Constitution. The legal battles went up the court system at breathtaking speed. And in the middle of all of it, the men were already inside CECOT. White shorts, shaved heads, metal bunks, permanent fluorescent light. Whatever the courts decided, those men were already there, already inside the walls, already cut off from communication, already disappeared into that silence. And their families, many of them living in the United States, had no idea where they were. One of those men had a name, Kilmer Abrego Garcia. He was Salvadoran by birth but had lived in the United States 4 years. He had a wife. He had children. He had a U.S. immigration case that was still open, meaning his legal status was actively being reviewed by the courts. There was something else about his case. Years earlier, an American immigration judge had issued a specific legal protection for him, a protection that said he could not be deported to El Salvador because he faced danger there. This protection was on record in the system. Official. Despite this, he was put on one of the deportation flights. The U.S. government later admitted in court that his deportation was, in their own words, an administrative error. But he was already in CECOT. And when American courts ordered the government to bring him back, the government said it couldn't. That El Salvador was a sovereign nation. That once a person was handed to another country's prison system, the United States had no power to retrieve them. The court didn't accept that answer. The judge said the government was choosing not to act, not that it was unable to act, and that choosing not to follow a court order was something with very serious consequences in a country governed by law. The case went all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States. The Supreme Court ruled that the government must facilitate Abrego Garcia's return. The government said it was working on it. Months passed. He remained in CECOT. As of the time this video was made, he had been inside that facility for months, separated from his wife and children, held in conditions that international human rights organizations have called cruel and inhumane. Despite a Supreme Court order demanding his return, but this story has another layer. Because, while all of this was happening in courtrooms and on news channels, something else was taking place quietly, and it speaks to how CECOT fits into something much bigger than one country's gang. Problem. The model was spreading. Ecuador looked at what Bukele had done, the dramatic drop in El Salvador's murder rate, the international attention, the image of a president who got tough, and they wanted it too. Ecuador was suffering its own gang crisis, with prison riots and cartel violence that had turned its jails into war zones. In November 2025, Ecuador opened El Encuentro, a CECOT-inspired mega-prison with a capacity of 12,000 people. Honduras announced plans for something similar. Guatemala followed. Costa Rica broke ground on their own version. And in the United States, some politicians began saying, openly, in interviews and on social media, that America should consider something like CECOT for its own most dangerous criminals. One of those politicians was the President of the United States himself. Trump publicly suggested that American citizens convicted of violent crimes could potentially be sent to CECOT. Let that sink in. American citizens sent to a foreign prison, with no visits, no phone calls, permanent fluorescent lights, bare metal bunks, shared with 150 strangers, locked in for 23.5 hours a day. Legal experts said this would be unconstitutional, that an American citizen cannot be sent to a foreign country's prison system, that it violated every protection that the Bill of Rights was written to guarantee. But the fact that it was being discussed openly by a sitting president told you something about where the conversation around punishment, prisons, and human rights was heading in 2025. So where does this leave us? Let's look at the full picture. El Salvador's murder rate, which was once 17 times higher than America's, has dropped dramatically since the crackdown began in 2023. El Salvador recorded one of the lowest murder rates in its modern history. Streets that were once controlled entirely by gangs are now, by most accounts, genuinely safer to walk down. Ordinary Salvadoran citizens, the ones who lived for decades under the terror of MS-13 and Barrio 18, many of them are grateful, not quietly grateful, loudly, publicly, passionately grateful. They re-elected Bukele in February 2024 with over 84% of the vote, 84%, in a legitimate election. That number matters, because it tells you that however the outside world judges what happened in El Salvador, the people who actually lived there, who buried their children because of gang violence, who paid protection money for decades, who watched their neighborhoods become no-go zones, they made their feelings clear at the ballot box. And that is not nothing, but, and this is a very important but, 261 documented deaths in custody, families with no answers, a 34-year-old plumber who died in a cell and whose wife still has no medical records, no explanation, no justice. A man protected by a U.S. court order who spent months on a metal bunk under fluorescent lights. While governments argued about paperwork, tens of thousands of people who, by the estimates of independent investigators, had no gang ties whatsoever. Men who had never committed a violent act, arrested because a neighbor made a phone call, or because of a tattoo, or because they were walking in the wrong place at the wrong time. Two things can be true at the same time. A country can be genuinely safer, and people can be genuinely suffering in that same country's prisons. Both of those things can be real. Both of those things are real. The question The question that philosophers and lawyers and human rights workers and ordinary people are wrestling with right now in 2025 is this: how much suffering is acceptable in exchange for safety? Who decides? And who checks to make sure the right people are the ones suffering, and not just the convenient ones? These are not easy questions. They don't have clean answers. Anyone who tells you they do is either lying or hasn't thought hard enough about it. There is one final thing worth knowing about CECOT before we end. The CBS News program 60 Minutes, one of the most respected journalism programs in the United States, running for over 50 years, completed a full investigative segment on CECOT. Reporters spoke to deportees who had been inside. They gathered testimony. They put the segment together. It was scheduled to air in December 2025. Hours before broadcast, it was pulled. Not delayed, pulled. Cancelled. Gone from the schedule without public explanation. The segment aired in Canada. It was distributed online. In it, two men who had been deported to CECOT and later returned described what happened inside. They spoke of beatings, of abuse, of things done to them in the dark that they could not fully put into words on camera. The U.S. version of that story was never officially broadcast to an American audience on American television. Make of that what you will. CECOT still stands today. The lights are still on. The cells are still full. New people arrive. Some are released quietly, with no announcement, no apology. Most stay. The government has said the goal is that it stays full. That El Salvador will never go back to what it was. And somewhere in there right now tonight, there are human beings sleeping on metal beds under permanent light in a building most of the world will never see from the inside, in a valley in Central America that doesn't appear on most tourist maps. Some of them are dangerous criminals who terrorized innocent people for years. Some of them are not. And the hardest, most uncomfortable truth of this entire story is that we may never know which is which. Because in a place with no windows, no phone calls, no visits, no letters, no journalists, and no way out, the truth has nowhere to go. It just stays inside, like everyone else. You just watch something that most people will never sit through. You stayed. That means something. If this documentary opened your eyes, share it. Send it to someone who needs to see it. Post it. The more people who know about CECOT, the harder it becomes to ignore. Subscribe to this channel because we cover the stories that are real, that are complicated, and that matter. Not just the easy ones. And drop a comment below. Tell me honestly, after everything you just learned, do you think the world should be building more prisons like CECOT? Or have we crossed a line that can never be uncrossed? I read every comment. I'll see you in the next one. Picture a building so large that if you filled it with people standing shoulder to shoulder, you still couldn't fit everyone inside. That is CECOT. From the outside, it looks almost clean, almost modern. Tall white walls, neat rows of guard towers, bright floodlights that never turn off, not at midnight, not at 3 a.m., not at dawn. The lights are always on. Because darkness here is considered dangerous. There are two fences surrounding the main structure. The outer one is electrified. Between the two fences, the ground is covered in loose gravel, not for decoration, but so that if anyone somehow made it over the first fence and touched down on the other side, the sound of footsteps on gravel would alert the guards instantly. Every entrance has full-body X-ray scanners. The kind airports use, but stronger. Nobody enters without being scanned. Nobody. There are over 600 surveillance cameras placed at every angle inside and outside the facility. Some of them are connected to facial recognition software and artificial intelligence systems that flag unusual behavior automatically. There are 19 guard towers positioned so that every inch of the outer walls can be seen at all times. And yet, despite all of this technology, all of these cameras, all of these guards, almost nothing from inside has ever reached the outside world. No photos taken by inmates. No phone calls recorded. No letters passed out through visiting families. Because there are no visiting families. Because there are no phone calls. Because there is no contact with the outside world at all. CECOT is one of the only places on Earth that is genuinely, completely, deliberately cut off from civilization. Now let's go inside. The moment a person enters CECOT, their old life ends. Not paused. Not put on hold. Ended. Their clothes are taken. They are given white shorts. That is the uniform. White shorts and nothing else. No shirt. No shoes. No socks. Just white shorts every single day for however long they are there. Their head is shaved. They are assigned a cell. The cells in CECOT are not small, private rooms the way you might imagine a prison cell. They are large concrete rooms built to hold between 70 and 156 people at a time. The walls are bare cement, the floor is bare cement, the ceiling is high, with bright fluorescent lights that, as mentioned, never turn off. Along the walls, and in rows through the middle of the room are metal bunk beds. 3 levels, high in some cells. The bunks are welded steel. No mattress. No pillow. No blanket provided unless a family member somehow arranges to send one in, which, since no visitors are allowed, almost never happens. Most men sleep on bare metal. Every night. There is one open toilet in the cell. No privacy partition. No door. One toilet for up to 156 people. There are cement sinks. Cold water only. And the lights stay on. Always. Sleeping under permanent bright light, in a room with over 100 other people, on a metal bunk with no padding, night after night after night. Sleep scientists will tell you that this alone causes serious psychological damage over time. The human brain needs darkness to properly rest. Without it, the mind slowly begins to deteriorate. But sleep is only the beginning of what life looks like here. In most prisons around the world, even very tough ones, inmates have some version of a daily routine that includes time outdoors. Fresh air, sunlight, exercise in a yard. Not at CECOT. There is no outdoor space for inmates. None. The entire facility is enclosed. The only exercise available is 30 minutes per day, sometimes, in the hallway directly outside the cell. Not a yard. Not a field. A hallway. 23.5 hours per day, every single day, spent inside a concrete room with up to 155 other people. No books are allowed. No newspapers. No radios. No televisions. No games. No pencils. No paper. There is nothing to do. Think about that for a moment. Truly think about it. You wake up on metal, under bright lights that were on all night, in a room full of people. There is nothing to read, nothing to watch, nothing to listen to. You cannot go outside. You cannot call anyone. You cannot write to anyone. You sit, you wait. You eat twice a day rice, beans, eggs, or pasta. No meat. Ever. No utensils. Potential weapons, they say. Then the lights stay on and you try to sleep again. That is the day. Every day. With no end date given. No sentence, Many of the men inside CECOT have never been formally sentenced by a judge. They are held under emergency powers. Some have been waiting for a trial for over 2 years. And the government has said, publicly, openly, that the goal is not rehabilitation. The goal, they have said, is that no one leaves. If this is hitting different right now, if you feel something watching this, make sure you're subscribed. Because what's coming in the next part of this video is the detail that nobody is talking about. The detail that will make you question everything you just heard. Subscribe so you don't lose this channel. Now here is something that, when you first hear it, sounds almost impossible to believe. 1013 and Barrio 18 are not just different gangs. They are enemy gangs. They have been killing each other for decades. Members of one gang, if found in the territory of the other, would be murdered on sight. These are organizations built on hatred of each other. At CECOT, they are placed in the same cells. Deliberately. Think about what that means. Men who, on the outside, were sworn to kill each other on sight, now locked in the same concrete room, sleeping on the same bunk beds, sharing the same toilet, unable to escape for years. The official explanation is that it prevents gang organization inside the prison. If rival gang members are mixed together, they can't hold meetings, can't coordinate, can't build power structures inside the facility. That logic makes a certain kind of sense on paper. But human rights observers who have studied the situation say what it actually creates is something else entirely, a pressure cooker. Constant tension. Constant fear. Violence that nobody on the outside hears about because nobody on the inside can tell anyone what's happening. We don't know exactly what goes on inside those cells between rival gang members at 3 a.m. when the guards are in the towers and 150 men are crammed together in the permanent fluorescent light. We genuinely don't know, because no one can tell us. And that silence, that total, enforced absolute silence, is one of the most disturbing things about CECOT. A place where 15,000 to 20,000 people currently live, a number approaching the population of a small town, and yet it produces zero information. Zero noise. Zero testimony. Zero. Like they vanished from the earth. There is one more thing about life inside CECOT that we need to address before we go further. People are dying in there. Not in huge numbers reported on the news. Not in a dramatic riot or a mass event that gets covered internationally, quietly, one by one. Human rights organization Cristozal, which has been tracking deaths in El Salvador's prisons since the mass arrests began, documented at least 261 deaths inside Salvadoran prisons in roughly the first year of the crackdown alone. 261 people who entered those prisons alive and did not come back out. The government's official explanation for most of these deaths, natural causes, pre-existing medical conditions. Cristozal's investigators looked deeper. They spoke to families of the deceased. They reviewed what evidence was available. Their conclusion was not natural causes. Their conclusion was that torture had become, in their exact words, state policy. They documented accounts of people beaten during arrest, people beaten during processing, people beaten inside the facilities, people who arrived at hospitals on the rare occasions they were taken out with broken bones, internal injuries, marks consistent with sustained physical abuse. The government denied these claims, but the families kept coming forward. Mother after mother, wife after wife, standing outside government buildings with photographs of their sons and husbands, asking the same question over and over again. Why did he die? What happened to him? Can we at least have his body? Some families waited months to receive remains. Some are still waiting. And the government's response, its official, public, on-record response, has essentially been, These were gang members. The streets are safer now. This is the price. But were they all gang members? Were all 85,000 people arrested under the state of exception actually members of MS-13 or Barrio 18? This is where the story gets complicated. This is the part that the government of El Salvador does not want to talk about, because the arrests happen fast, extremely fast. Tens of thousands of people swept up in weeks. Police and soldiers moving through neighborhoods with lists of names, responding to tips from neighbors, arresting anyone with a suspicious tattoo, anyone who looked like they might be affiliated. And here is what investigators found when they started looking at individual cases. A 16-year-old boy arrested because a neighbor, who had a land dispute with his family, called a tip line and gave his name. A 45-year-old construction worker arrested because he had a tattoo on his arm that he got as a teenager, not a gang tattoo, just a tattoo. But someone reported him anyway. A man arrested while he was buying groceries. No criminal record, never charged. Held for over a year before being quietly released with no explanation and no apology. A deaf man arrested because he couldn't hear the police commands and didn't respond quickly enough. His family found out where he was 3 months later. Human Rights Watch, one of the most respected human rights organizations in the world, conducted a detailed investigation. Their estimate, based on the cases they were able to review, was staggering. They estimated that approximately 70% of those arrested under the state of exception had no verifiable connection to gang activity. 70%. If that number is even close to accurate, and multiple independent organizations have arrived at similar conclusions, then of the 85,000 people arrested, tens of thousands of them were simply people, ordinary people. Fathers, brothers, sons. Men who were in the wrong neighborhood, had the wrong tattoo, or had the wrong enemy who called a tip line. And some of those ordinary people ended up in CECOT. In those cells, on those metal bunks, under those permanent lights, with no phone call, no lawyer, no visitor. No way out? I need you to stop right here. If you're still watching, if this story is doing something to you right now, drop the word CECOT in the comments. Just that one word. I want to see how many of you made it this far. And stay with me, because the final part of this story goes somewhere nobody expected. Not El Salvador. Not a courtroom. The United States of America. There is a woman named Maria. We are not using her real name to protect what remains of her family's safety, who lived in a suburb of San Salvador with her husband and 3 children. Her husband was a plumber. He had worked for the same company for 11 years. He had no criminal record. He had never been arrested. He had one tattoo, a cross on his left forearm, that he got when he was 19 years old to honor his mother, who had passed away. On a Thursday morning in June 2022, soldiers came to their home at 5 a.m. They took him. He was processed, photographed, fingerprinted, then moved from facility to facility as the prison system buckled under the weight of the mass arrests. 8 months later, Maria received a phone call from a government office. Her husband was dead. The official cause listed was respiratory failure. He was 34 years old. Maria asked for his medical records. She was told they were not available. She asked to see the facility where he had been held. She was told that was not possible. She asked what had happened in the months between his arrest and his death. She received no answer. She is still waiting for answers. She is not alone. There are hundreds of families like hers across El Salvador. Women waiting at government offices. children growing up without fathers, mothers who have not seen their sons in 2 years and do not know if they are alive. This is the part of the CECOT story that the drone footage doesn't show. This is the part that wasn't broadcast on national television. And this would all be, perhaps, just a story about one small country in Central America if it had stayed there. But it didn't stay there, because in early 2025, a phone call was made between two of the most powerful men in the Western Hemisphere, and what they agreed to sent shockwaves through courts, governments, and families on an entirely different continent. The story of CECOT was about to cross a border, and nothing would be the same after that.